Today on eurOpinii, I am joined by Alison Mutler, journalist, former Associated Press correspondent, and one of the most experienced international reporters covering Eastern Europe, democratic transition, and the political transformations that have reshaped the region over the past decades. At a moment when trust in journalism is declining, societies are becoming increasingly polarized, and information itself is turning into a geopolitical battleground. On our conversation, will explore a broader question: what happens to democracy when people no longer share the same understanding of reality? We will discuss journalism, propaganda, political influence, social fragmentation, and the growing pressure placed on democratic systems across both Eastern and Western societies. Thank you for joining me, Alison. It's a great honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me. Thank you.
My first question is, across Europe and the United States, trust in journalism is collapsing at the same time. Political polarization is deepening. And what do you think? This is primarily a media crisis or a wider crisis of democratic society itself?
Well, Anna, I think it's actually interconnected. I've been a journalist, as you say, for a long time, for 35 years. So I remember how it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And basically, journalists were trusted and respected up until the first mandate of term of Donald Trump when he was president. And he brought in the term fake media. Before that, mainly speaking, politicians respected us, they were scared of us almost. And there was it would have been a terrible idea for a politician to be rude to a journalist or publicly or question what they wrote or said they wrote fake news. So Donald Trump started that. But obviously he came out of somewhere because there must have been dissatisfaction with other politicians, perhaps with the Republican Party and so on. So he didn't appear out of anywhere. But I suppose the lack of trust in the media also coincides with the world widespread availability of the internet, and that there are different sources of information. When I started out as a journalist, we would listen to the state radio, we'd listen to the bulletins, I think at 8, at 12, at 4, at 6, at 9. And we'd have Ron Press would churn out news on a telex, as would Mall Press. So we had that and we had the papers. But nowadays, a lot of young people, particularly, and not only young people, are getting their news from social media. That means that news, people that write what they do can write absolutely anything with no repercussions, no responsibility. And often they try and make it more exciting because sometimes, the news isn't that exciting. There isn't a major development. So people on social media can put all kinds of spin and angles and absolutely make up stories. And perhaps it's more interesting for people to believe those stories than what they would find in the legacy media or the mainstream media, on the BBC or in the Guardian or in the New York Times, or even on Sky News, for example, which has been around since the 90s or late 80s, I think. So there is a huge confusion about the media. What is the media? And a lot of these people on social media are not trained journalists. They don't have the standards, the principles, the rigors. The fear that I used to work for the Associated Press for 25 years, you always had a fear of getting something wrong. Some people actually enjoy publishing lies, spreading lies, posting lies. And if there's a lack of media literacy and you have people reading that, they may choose to believe what they see on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter, that's another one, or X as it's called now, rather than what they see in the mainstream media on the BBC, for example. I'm just using that as an example of a news organization that is known around the world. And that is problematic. So nobody kind of knows in a way who a journalist is now, or anyone can be a journalist now, or say they're a journalist. They can have a podcast. There's nothing wrong with it. It's very good to have a podcast.
Yeah, didn't have study
Oh,
journalism or something.
and
Yeah.
they may have one, their aim may be purely to entertain, therefore come up with all kinds of stories. They may have political aims. They may, I'm not saying they work for a party, maybe they do work, they get money from a political party, or there is a lot of disinformation out there. Maybe they're part of that ecosystem. You
Yeah,
don't know.
the main question is who will benefit this kind of people.
Well, this kind of ecosystem, this kind of situation we're talking about benefits people, actors who like confusion, who like division, who like societies, people not to trust their governments. I'm not saying governments should always be trusted, but that doesn't mean everything they say is nonsense because there are other governments working against them. If we look at Russian disinformation during the pandemic, for example, and disinformation is very intelligent in some way that it uses a tiny bit of the truth and then it creates its own narrative. And the aim of the narrative is, or the aim of disinformation is to divide, to confuse and destroy and turn people against their leaders or against the European Union. Because if you look, the Russian disinformation is very active in Europe, which is a richer, more prosperous, more democratic continent than Russia is. I haven't heard of too much Russian disinformation going on in Southeast Asia. Maybe it's because I'm not informed. But Russian disinformation is generally aimed at societies that are more prosperous or more democratic or hope to be more prosperous and democratic than Russia. For example, Ukraine is a very good example. There we have a full-scale war, not a special military operation. But this is where they use disinformation and where I live in Romania, and they will pick on key topics like the Romanian Orthodox Church, like the European Union, and say that Romanians are mistreated, or the LGBT communities, and say that that Europe wants the whole of the continent to become LGBT, which is absolute nonsense. Or they'll pick on, I mean, I have to say honestly, I used to report on Romania and Moldova's minority in Ukraine before 2022, so I knew quite a bit about it, and it was a very, very sideline subject. It was really not mainstream in the slightest. And then after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, I suddenly heard people talking about Romania's minority in Ukraine. And they were people who would not have heard of it, but it became part of the arsenal of Russia's propaganda to say, look at
Yeah, to
your
divide Romania
yeah,
from
look at your
Ukraine.
minority. And I know very well because I used to report on it before 2022. It was a very niche, if you like, subject. I mean, it was a sensitive subject in the sense that the Romanian Foreign Ministry, etc., realized that this is a subject that could be exploited. But the general population knew nothing about it. It was like, what's that? It was really not, it was just for journalists certain journalists who cover these kind of things. And if I wrote a story about it, even if it was well, researched and written well, it didn't get a lot of attention. Believe me, it didn't get a lot of attention. It was Romania trying to get more rights for the population there and would write a story and be, well researched. But what didn't get a lot of traffic. And then suddenly, after 2022 invasion, you heard all kinds of people going on about the Romanian minority in Ukraine. And that is when I began to get quite interested in what is what Russia is doing. It's poking, and it's not just. I'm sure Russia acts also is active through actors like Serbia, for example. It's not just all done by Russia, maybe China, but Russia has the main political interest in the region. Of stirring things up, of making people think that they're mistreated, of making people dissatisfied with their governments, with the European Union, with NATO, organizations which have a guarantee they're not perfect by any means possible. No, human beings aren't perfect, but they have,
Yeah, of course.
the European Union has done, and you're in Moldova, and you're in, you're hoping to become a member of the European Union as soon as you can. But it's brought massive benefits to Romania, massive since 2017. Roads, schools, investments everywhere in rural areas, not just like in downtown Bucharest or in Cluj. Masses of investments, the possibility to, travel freely, and Romanians were I don't want to say desperate, but that's really the word, to get into the European Union. They wanted to be part of this bloc, this trading bloc, this free movement bloc, this bloc that brought huge investments. And if you look, of course, Romania pays every year, but if I don't have the figures on me, but if you look at how much they invest or have invested compared to how much they've received far more money than of course, because Romania is not one of the richest members of the European Union. They've received far more money than they've paid in. And, there are billions. Even now, there is a lot of money at stake for the development of the country, from everything from digital to agriculture to roads to schools to education to medical.
Universities, yeah.
It's massive. It's massive, the advantages that the EU has brought. It has developed Romania. Romania began to develop more after 2000. First of all, they joined NATO. And then they joined the European Union. And that's when the big scale development started to happen. Again, of course, the EU isn't perfect, but we're talking about what advantages and benefits Romanians have enjoyed since they joined the bloc, the trading bloc in not just trading bloc, it's also political in 2007. And I'm sure it would bring equally good benefits to the population of Moldova.
Yeah, I saw a lot of narratives in Romania, like Romania is it's about like so it's sovereignty. If you heard about this, of course, Romania
Sovereignty.
is losing her sovereignty or something. This is like most pro-Russian
Actually,
politicians.
actually, the word comes was used by one of Putin's aides, and about, I can't remember his name, in about 2004, he came up with sovereignty because it sounds very like wow and special, and we have our own independence. Um, and it's a false word. It's a word, it's an emotional word.
Yeah.
Sovereign. It sounds terrible in English. So I don't like saying the sovereigntists. It sounds terrible. Suveranist, I suppose, in Romanian sounds a bit better. But it's not about it's not about sovereignty, because these people anyway are pro, they would like to be more under the influence of Russia. And what sovereignty is that? It's
Yeah, of
just a word.
course.
It's the word, for example, if you look at Viktor Orban, who was voted out of power in a very democratic way last month, he spoke about sovereignty, but he didn't respect Ukraine's sovereignty.
Well, there's double standards when only your
It's a
opinion and
political
your
trick, I
political
think.
trick matter. Yes.
It's a political trick. And I have to tell you something else. For example, Bulgaria on the 1st of January joined the euro. You can understand the older people are upset, but prices went up. That's actually to be expected in any society. But you know what? The Bulgarian euro has one of their most revered saints on the coin. So they have the euro, but it's a Bulgarian euro. It has a Bulgarian symbol on it.
Yeah,
So so
that's
so
good.
people, in Romania, I don't see a loss of autonomy. Of course, that if you want a European grant of many millions or even more, you have you have to pass certain standards. You can't have widespread corruption and an unfair betting procedure, or an auction, or what's it called, licitație, an auction for a bid. You can't have that. If the EU is giving out their money, it's everyone's money. It's not like it's a general pot. It doesn't come from just Brussels. It comes from everyone. They have to know that they're giving their money out, and it will be used correctly and fairly. That's it. And I
Transparently.
think that's quite, if you work for a company, Anna. I used to work for the AP. If I worked for a company and I had I covered a subject, and I went, I did a story and I went away and I had some expenses, I have to justify those expenses. I can't just come with my gas bill. I have to
Yeah.
say this was the hotel, this was the petrol, and it has to be, if I went 700 kilometers, it'd be much more than if it was a 50-kilometer ride. So you have to justify, if you're using somebody else's money, or you're asking an organization money, you have to justify the expenses. And it's the same with the EU. You can't just say, yeah, I'll get this loan and I'll give 10% to this one and this and this, and we'll get our friends getting the bid. No, that's not
Yeah,
how it
like
works.
Viktor Orban.
Yeah, that's not how it works. And the European Union isn't stupid. And they do now have the European Public Prosecutor's Office, which Romanian prosecutor Laura Kövesi was chief of. I think she's about to step down in June. They prosecute. I get their press releases every week about the misuse of EU funds, whether it's Italy, Slovakia, Poland, Romania, Greece, etc., write about it all the time.
Well, that's how it's is like to be. How it's a
Yeah,
good way to
these are
work
cases,
in this
obviously it's all
case.
suspected, of fraud where people have been misusing EU money. That, if the EU is dispersing this money, they have to be sure that it's spent in a transparent and honest way, not some individuals are benefiting from it for their own personal, for their own personal benefits.
Yeah, that's for sure. You have reported on Eastern Europe for decades. Did this region understand earlier that than the West, how information can be used as a tool of political influence and social fragmentation?
Well, it is more and more, and I think being used as a weapon of fragmentation, particularly talking about Russia's disinformation war, um, particularly because of the internet. Before, the possibility of an ordinary person publishing was very, very limited. But now anyone can publish. They can go on Facebook, they can go on Instagram, they can go on X, write anything they want.
Yeah,
And they can be,
Telegram as well.
yeah, Telegram, sorry. Well, there seems to be an alarm in my yard. Oh dear.
So do you think many Western democracies underestimated how vulnerable open societies are to manipulation through media ecosystems and digital platforms?
Yeah, I think that some countries woke up earlier than others, particularly, and I'm talking about Western. Western to me means in the EU and NATO, or at least in the EU. The Baltic states were way ahead of France, or I think, and Germany, because they are on the front line, and also they used to be part of the Soviet Union, so they understand it more. I think Moldova is ahead of Romania in dealing with disinformation.
Yeah, day by
Romania
day.
itself had a very dramatic case when the presidential elections were cancelled because of alleged Russian disinformation, which of course Moscow denied. So Romania, from what I know, was quite far behind for countries on the eastern flank of NATO in disinformation. And I have to say, since President Nicu Jordan was elected last May, he has been more open and transparent, whereas Klaus Johannes, the former president, I think he hoped that the authorities would deal with it and there didn't have to be too much public communication. And I think the
Yeah,
more,
at least he started to speaking about Russian interference and disinformation in Romania, like from head of the state. It was clearly speaking about this.
yeah, he has since he became president, because it is part of the hybrid warfare against um, the West. And as I said, the West is a country, it's not just it is geographical, but it's countries and members of the EU, and in Romania's case, NATO. And I think the public weren't very aware of it, and even a lot of journalists weren't very aware of it. And it took a while for people to become informed. Of course, some people say it's rubbish. Some, of course, well, there's sort of people say things like, why on earth would Russia be interested? But that shows to me a great naivety and great provincialism to say, why would Russia? Of course, Russia would be interested in destabilizing an EU and a NATO country, particularly one. They use, for example, common factors like the Orthodox Church. Say, look, we're both Orthodox, we're the same, and the West is all about LGBT and I don't know what, woke and etc. Jump on things and they exploit them, and but they do that not just they do it. I've seen it in the UK as well on Facebook, and it seems to me particularly to people who feel in some way maybe they're not as well. I won't say they're not well educated, but they've educated themselves and they don't trust the mainstream parties. And once you get sucked into a particular, this is the thing I've seen. Once you get sucked into a particular ecosystem, you know what it's like with the algorithms. You get all the information, and so
Yeah.
you're fed it all the time. And so you're getting it all the time. So when you're getting it all the time, you have a tendency to believe it. and you speak to people who are like-minded, and therefore you generally believe what they say, and people begin not. They think they're thinking for themselves, and they think they like the idea they're not thinking like the government. But that doesn't. But to my mind, they don't have good judgment because okay, something that the government says are because they want to stay in power in any country. But it doesn't mean everything they say is not true, in the slightest. And this particularly was evident during the pandemic. I noticed with the Russian disinformation, it's almost saying there's no pandemic and all the vaccines are going to, that just going to die
Yeah,
and
microchips, like
microchips. And I saw some of the Russian influencers would kind of go to a beach somewhere and go, look, I'm having a wonderful time. My life is wonderful. And there's no pandemic, which is rubbish because there was nobody else on the beach. Um, and the West is just stirring up fear. I think, if we do, touch wood, we don't have another pandemic. But if we have another one, the governments will have learned their lessons from last time. Perhaps some of the some of the measures that were enacted were excessive, perhaps. And next time, I remember at one point we actually had to wear masks going out the street in Romania, and somebody got fined because they were smoking. I mean, it became a bit ridiculous, but even that was dropped quite quickly. I mean, it was the first time in 100 years the world had a pandemic, so there was a lot of like, how are we going to act? How are we going to protect people? And I think if another one happened, and of course I hope it doesn't, I think that measures will be taken, but it won't be perhaps as it was last time. That said, there were a lot of deaths caused by COVID. I was reporting one month, I think it was November 2022 or 2023. It was a November for sure. And the amount of deaths in that November had never been higher except during the First and the Second World War in Romania. And it was because of the COVID. So many people
yeah.
died. So you can't say that there was no COVID, or people used to say, no, they didn't die of COVID. They died because, but to me, that is just what we call splitting hairs. Okay, but if you hadn't got COVID, you wouldn't have died. That you have what these, you have other illnesses or comorbidities or whatever, other conditions. Yes, that does weaken you. I could
Yeah,
get
yeah.
somebody who gets
People
tuberculosis.
like to believe in conspiracies, theories about I don't know, governments, about the Western societies who wants to just absorb them. Romania or Moldova. It's because of the propaganda, Russian
Yeah.
propaganda, of course.
But also there is I think perhaps because of communism, there is a tendency to distrust the government. Um, I remember in 1997, a long time ago, yeah, 30 years next year, when Princess Diana died. And it was a Saturday night, and I went to church. I go to the Anglican church. I went to church in the morning, and I remember I saw the ambassador there. And that was very rare in those days. The ambassador would come for the Christmas services and maybe for Easter, but not just on late August. So what he's doing there, and he was wearing his suit as well. So he wasn't coming almost as a private, individual. Because I hadn't turned on the radio, and we didn't have mobile phones then. It was a Sunday morning. I'd gone to bed, and suddenly I found that Diana had died, and it was very very shocking. And that's why he'd been at church, because she'd been killed, and he was dressed in his suit, so he came as the ambassador, not as a private person. And I remember after that, it was shocking news around the world, and it went on for a long time. The whole thing. And the funeral was a week later in London, and etc. But I remember a lot of Romanians immediately didn't think she was killed in a car accident. They said that the Queen had set it up because she was dating a Muslim and all this. But what surprised me is not that one person said it, that it was quite common to hear conspiracy theories. So I do think in Romania, I'm not sure about Moldova, but I do think in Romania there is a tendency to create an alternative narrative to the official one.
In
And
Moldova as well.
yeah, for the first time I saw this, some people always have conspiracy theories, but I was quite surprised by the number of people who seem to believe this. in Romania at that time. And that was my first encounter with, this was a international news story, nothing to do with Romania whatsoever. So we can't suspect the Romanian government of doing something, of interfering or trying to cover something up. Um, and people didn't believe it. I do remember in the first years after Ceausescu was killed, people said he was living up in Maramureș. For people listening in, that's a very remote, beautiful remote area near the Ukrainian and Hungarian border. And even though we'd all seen him killed and his son put on trial and him and his wife, there were some people saying, no, he's alive actually. Okay, not a large amount of people, but people always will. There'll always be some people believing conspiracies. And when we live in an age where there is the trust in the media has declined, it's very easy for hostile actors to push conspiracy theories and alternative narratives. And people have to use their own brains, and they don't. I remember going to a local cake shop, and the woman there she's a single mother. She doesn't have a good life. And she started talking to me about Macron. And I said to Duamna, can you just tell me why you're interested in Emmanuel Macron? Surely in your own life you have enough problems and Romania has enough
Yeah,
things
of
going on.
course.
Why are you interested in Emmanuel Macron? I mean, my parents are very elderly. They don't talk about Emmanuel Macron unless there's a big news story about him. And it's because they listen to these certain podcasts like Emmanuel Macron is a real target for Russian disinformation because they thought that the French generally were more pro-Russian, but then obviously with the invasion of Ukraine, things have changed. So Emmanuel Macron, France is a powerful country within Europe, so he is selected out as particularly bad because because of what he said. But I said to her, why are you thinking about Emmanuel Macron? What is he relevant to your life? But people don't ask themselves this question. They just tune into podcasts. I think it was Marius Tuco or something. He's a Romanian journalist who's been a journalist for a long time. They tune into these things and look what Macron's doing and look what, the EU is doing and look what this and this and this. And so they have this alternative sources of information and they have alternative ways of finding out what they think is the reality. And that is because of the internet, because we didn't have it 20 years ago, not in the way we have it now anyway.
Yeah, the news are spreading very, very fast. So, across Europe, populist movements are growing even in democratic societies with free media and open access to information. Has journalism lost the ability to compete with emotionally driven political narratives?
No, I think I'm an optimist here. And yes, it's definitely a challenge, but a journalist has to just get on, my view, and do their job. And a journalist, in my view, I'm an old, if you like, school style journalist. I don't believe in journalism activism. I think the role of a journalist is to call out where there are injustices, where they happen to various groups or people. Yes, but it's not our job as journalists to do activism. So if we keep to our job and we do our job, there will be enough people who will appreciate that. You will always have people who want to believe conspiracy theories. And I do believe there are more people are more confused than they were 20 years ago. And that's to be expected because there are so many sources of information and information is so readily available. And anything that's readily available is cheap. Lies are cheap. Truth
Yeah.
is more expensive because you have to check things, make phone calls, etc. Be sure, fact checked. Truth is more expensive. Lies are cheap. And particularly lies where there is no consequence. They can't be traced back. You are not responsible. At the AP, I worked at Reuters AP and I made a mistake, I would be in trouble, depending on what kind of mistake. But I remember once we wrote something and some, I think, ethnic Hungarians didn't like it in the United States. And we spent hours and hours and hours deciding what to do. I mean, what we should do. It wasn't a mistake, but we issued what we call a clarification that we should clarify. It was to do with Transylvania. I won't go into it. It was to do with Transylvania. We hadn't made a mistake, but we clarified something. Think how expensive that is. All those managers in New York, me here, all those hours of work. Lie just goes like that. Costs nothing.
Yeah, and the
Um,
people who are spreading the lies, they even don't like clarify when they are like It's
Because they're not journalists working in the, industry. If you're a journalist, if I write something universal and it's wrong, I did yesterday. I got some pictures wrong. I posted some pictures, I'll tell you honestly, for a wrong event. And I tried to hide the article, put it like something where it could not be seen until I could get the right pictures. And somebody rang me up this morning. I can still see your article. I said, yes, I'm waiting for the pictures. I've taken it off all the category, on the various categories. He said, yes, but I can still see it. I said, please send me the pictures because I don't want to take the whole article off because it's basically 3/4 of it is okay. I just need different pictures. Uh, and of course, we did that in the end. But I am accountable. I am, who is the director of Universal Dura? Who wrote this? I'm accountable. Ixulescu, who spreads all this stuff, who might be connected to disinformation or just picking up from other people, has no responsibility whatsoever. I mean, I do wonder, because I don't work for a big company anymore, and I'm sure there are rules about big company, what you do post on social media. But there's enough people there's also false accounts. But I know Meta has taken steps to cut down on that because you can pretend to be somebody who doesn't exist and write anything without anybody ever even identifying you. But I
Yeah,
know,
but there are a lot of bots, so fake
bots, yeah.
accounts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it when I'm like the people, but it's bots are commenting or some topics in my comments. Well,
Yeah.
thanks to them, I'm reaching my page, so we can see.
No, what I notice is particularly with the developments with the Russia-Ukraine war,
Yeah.
I'm seeing the same narratives appearing. And you see certain things, you hear them, and you realize that there is that, these have been cooked up somewhere, these have been created somewhere, these narratives, and then they're passed down the chain. And however people are connected to the chain, whether they're directly involved in it or they just, it's part of their algorithms. And then you hear people repeating the same thing. A very interesting one I heard recently, which I think is also probably part of Russian disinformation, is why aren't there strikes? Greve. Because in the 90s, we had masses of strikes all the time, and the trade unions were always political, always, often with the Romanian PSD, the Social Democrats, but not necessarily. And a strike would be an excellent thing for somebody who wanted to disrupt Western society, because you would, whether it's teachers or railway workers or nurses, doctors, you would totally disrupt it. And I heard this story, why aren't we having strikes? In England by somebody who's pro-Russian. In fact, I watch them partly because they are pro-Russian, just to hear what they are tapping into. And I heard it from a friend in Romania who's also pro-Russian. So I said, oh, this must be the latest thing to encourage strikes because across the Western world, across Europe, because that would benefit Russia, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for
It would
sure.
disrupt, yeah, everyone would blame the government, etc. Just create chaos, division, tensions, etc.
Yeah. Or maybe we are entering a period where identity anger and emotional mobilization matter more politically than facts themselves in this case. What do you think?
I think emotion has always counted in politics. If you look at Winston Churchill, when he said, we'll fight them on the beaches and we'll never, never, never give in. I'm not quoting him, whatever. So I think emotion has always counted, or the famous speech by Martin Luther King.
Yeah, but
So emotion,
that was a good one to
yeah.
mobilize people in the right way.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But emotion, what I'm saying is, I think emotion does count. If you're just like an academic, you're not going to get people voting for you. I mean, that's what I always try when I have academics write for Universal. I say, please, we have to make it a bit more interesting to read. And politicians are a different, that we are sort of in the same world, but that the emotion is always used, but it depends whether it's used um in a good way or in a bad way, or what its aim is it the aim so you vote for me, or you inspire people to fight for their country, as was or not give up, as was with Winston Churchill, or whether you inspire hate. We hate the Western world. What is this? We hate the Western world. I think there's a lot of jealousy, if you ask me, of the European Union.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That's what I
I
think. I
agree
think
with
there's a lot
that.
of envy and jealousy, to be honest. And yeah, that's what I think. I think
Frustration of some politicians.
frustrations
Yeah.
too. Ordinary people, so they hear so obviously Russians have to hear how absolutely terrible the European Union is, um, and how it's very bad to its citizens and how it treats different members in a discriminate way. They discriminate against some members. But I don't think a dictatorship wants an organization where there are freedoms, where the freedom of movement, where there's investment beyond what your government can do. They don't want that. They want countries to be isolated and by themselves, because we all know if you're in a group that you have more access to resources. If you're by yourself, it's very hard.
That's why Russia is trying to divide the European Union and also NATO. So when I'm doing this, counter disinformation, I'm speaking facts. I don't have so much reaching unless it's a very emotional or sensible topic. So my question is: have facts lost emotional power in modern politics?
Oh no, I think you need facts. I mean, in journalism as well, you need facts to illustrate emotion. I mean, for example, I'm one of my, I'm a mentee on the RATU forum, and I'm a mentor and you're a mentee, so we guide our mentees. And I remember there was an emotional story from one of my mentees, and I said, I think this should be at the top of the article. But then I saw further down some incredible fact that only 22% of Romanian students, I must double check this, actually complete their full faculty, including the dissertation and everything. And this is a very important fact. And it's the same for politicians. You can come with the emotions. But if you don't back it up with facts, it's not,
It's only like very, very low argument to speak about.
if you want
Yeah.
to have a good argument, even as a journalist, but as a politician, come with the emotion. You need to do that because you need to engage people. And that's what, if disinformation understands, you need to engage people. But I think disinformation works on a low vibe, on low things, on fear, on uncertainty. I mean, you think of Orban, it was always about the fear of migration, that Ukraine is going
Confusion,
to do, I
yeah.
don't know what, confusion. And I think Nick Thorpe, who's a mentor, said in the end, people got scared, got sick of all this negative messaging. They want a message of hope. And that's one thing that the Russian disinformation doesn't give. They don't give a message of hope. They give up, except for they come with this idea of sovereignty, but I don't. It's just an expression that people think sounds nice, but it doesn't actually mean. If people actually thought it through, they realize they'd be much worse off if they weren't in the EU, if they didn't have the security guarantees as in Romania or of NATO. The country would be far less developed, and it would, I know I'm British, and Brexit has been a loss for the EU. It's been a loss for Britain, but it's also been a loss for the people who wanted it because it did not bring what the emotional argument said it would bring. And there have been who's profited? Russia, I suppose, and some people perhaps who made money out of it. But even the people who voted for it are unhappy.
So maybe it's time to Great Britain to return to EU.
Ah, that's another question. I don't know whether it was such a painful time. It happened 10 years ago this summer. I remember the morning it happened. But it took, I think it was 2021 when I had to change my papers in Romania to become a non-EU citizen. It took another 5 years to be implemented, and it caused a lot of tensions in the UK. It really has been a very it's been very bad for the UK. I mean, some of its supporters say, oh, it was never implemented. Well, of course it's implemented. We don't no longer part of the European Union. You can just, I'm not even talking about customs. It's very, when and trading, it's been made much more difficult. And these ideas, we will be trading with these other nations outside the EU, but Britain is part of Europe. Okay, we have the Channel, the English Channel that separates the continental mainland from
Yeah.
Britain. But it, I don't. Very few people profited. If they had the vote again, I'm sure Britons would not vote for Brexit, but I think people think there's been so much anger and tension and discussion and social unrest, if you like, almost,
Fragmentation
that we
as
don't want to
well.
have, we don't want another vote. So I think, Britain has to find ways to reconnect with Europe, but I'm not sure it's going to, Britain will rejoin, but maybe Britain's story will be a good tale for other people, other countries wanting to leave the EU.
Yeah, for sure. That will be an example how to
An
not
example, yeah.
do. The war in Ukraine has transformed the way Europe thinks about security. Has it also changed the way journalism itself functions in Eastern Europe?
Well, as I said, we talked about disinformation. There is more disinformation, and some of the disinformation does come from journalists, because some journalists perhaps are part of the disinformation. And we have in Romania, we have, I think, Radio Total, and that is full of
Yeah, and Christoyu is as well.
Cristoiu, all these old guys, particularly deal with this. They're connected to that sort of network. So yes, I think in some ways it has, and then also it's made the people who aren't. We're almost, we talk about Russian disinformation. So for the Russian side, perhaps we're enemies. And the thing that was strange for me after Cătălin Georgescu was, Călin Georgescu was disqualified, it's suddenly the fact of being a pro, if you like, European, which meant was normal in the 15 years before that. Suddenly it was a political position that you're against the sovereigntists.
Yeah.
And it was quite scary. Uh,
But
Suddenly
he
you're
came out
forced.
of nowhere, through TikTok,
Yeah, I knew,
through
I actually had met him. Um, I interviewed him many, many years ago, and I did not have a good impression because he was full of conspiracies. And
yeah.
I'm not a person who is very convinced by conspiracies. And but I know people are, and I know he has a lot of charm for certain people, certain voters, but I'm not. Generally, it's men, Romanian men, some Romanian, even men who wouldn't vote for him. They said we can see his charm. Well, I'm not Romanian, I'm not a man. I didn't see his charm in the slightest. I find him
I
quite.
I couldn't
I'm not.
believe when I worked in my one of my previous works. There was our metropolis of Bessarabia, who is Romanian patriarchy. Like they believed in Călin Georgescu. Like they promoted his
I know.
candidate.
The lady in the
Candidate.
cake shop heard
Yeah.
about Călin Georgescu from the patriarchy, because we live near the patriarchy. And she heard from a couple of people from the patriarchy that he's very good and he donates to monasteries. And
That's very, very strange. But I had to say it, but they know how to promote these narratives because they know
absolutely,
a lot of
absolutely.
psychology, psychosocial movements.
Tradition. They have a long
Traditional
tradition.
movements as well, and the Russian propaganda, what is doing, they divided like Ukraine and Poland through history, Romania and Ukraine through history, even Moldova and Romania, because here the narratives are like we are Moldovans and Moldova Mare, through like from Stefan cel Mare, Stephen the Great. That's a very big ones narratives. Romania and Hungary as well. So that's like they are step by step. And when the government is doing something lower or not at the expectation of people, they very, very quickly something find and criticize. It's okay to criticize, but when you criticize in the way you do it for your country or for their interest, like that's the main question. So, can journalism remain fully independent in moments when democratic systems themselves feel under pressure?
Well, it's much harder to be independent. Also, we have a financial crisis because of the internet, which has given us access to information right away, which is good. But it means advertising revenues have dried up. So journalists rely on grants, they rely on traffic, they rely on philanthropists, and so it is hard. But all you can do is, do as a journalist, do an honest job the best you can and realize you're not perfect. Sometimes I'm too hurried on a story. It could have benefit with me spending more time, making more effort on it. And then but you need, the sites, they need to be full of news all the time. So it is, we're under a lot of pressure, but we have to keep doing our job. And there's a remaining expression which says a lie has short legs. Minciunare picioare scurte. And some of these lies, in the end, they will be revealed as lies. Good old-fashioned reporting, using facts, fact checks, being fair, not searching for the truth, but being fair and doing a professional job. I think it will prevail. I think it will prevail. But there's a lot of challenges, but these challenges do not come from an authentic place. They come from a place of wanting to destroy. So I do have faith that proper journalism will resist, because I don't want to think that humans will no longer be civilized and they will just believe in lies and disinformation. So I believe that, of course, there is a place for it, and it's very important that we have mentor and mentee programs to train young journalists and to pass on just our skills, but our experience. And it's important, but
I
there's
liked
always going to
your
be.
point at the Ratio Masterclass when you said about the trust in media, when people are believing, when they are seeing someone, necrology or something like that, they are believing in media, like someone passed away. Uh,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
no. Hey, it's also a kind of fashionable thing to say is the media is rubbish. I don't trust the media, but these are also for people who are perhaps frustrated. But then when there is a train accident, when the government falls, when a pop star dies, or something like that, or when the Queen of England died, people will go to the BBC, they will go to the Guardian, they will go to even the Daily Mail, they will go to, I'm just talking about sites I know, they'll go to Le Monde, they will go to the legacy media, the mainstream media for that. It's just their take on it, their views, but they still do trust the legacy media, but it's kind of fashionable to say it's a load of rubbish. They're all they have an agenda, la 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 la.
yeah,
But
and it
no,
came a normalization when Donald Trump started to do this.
yeah, he normalized it in his first term in office. But you see, a journalist, I have access, or you have access as a journalist to different information. You can pick it up off Facebook, but to confirm something, you need to speak to an official. And Itsulescu, Mr. Smith, cannot call up an official to find something out because they're not a journalist. So journalists have different access to an ordinary member of public. Ordinary member of public can see it written in a newspaper or see it on the television, but they themselves do not have access to finding out information in the same way as a journalist does.
Yeah. So my final question is, what happens to democracy when societies lose their trust, not only in media institutions, but in a very idea of shared truth?
It's a huge challenge, and I think there is a huge challenge to democracies across the world. The thing is, I think it's Winston Churchill says that democracy is very imperfect, but it's better than all the other systems. So, okay, they're always going to be authoritarian states, but they're not states in which perhaps the citizens are very happy. They might be dragged away at night. They may be punished for saying the wrong thing. They may have to join, a political party they don't want to join. So I don't think authoritarian states are very happy, but democracy is under threat, and it's under threat from outside, from authoritarian actors, but also, from within, because that people who are in these societies, often people who aren't necessarily stupid or poor, but people who in some ways are frustrated. And they will pick up and they will carry on that message. And they have an ability to do that like they never had before on social media. But not everyone is on social media all the time. I mean, I have to be, you have to be, because we're journalists, but not everybody is. So yes, I think democracy is under threat in a way it wasn't 20 years ago. And it's just democracy has to, democratic actors have to find ways to strengthen themselves and to consolidate. Because it
Like
gives a better, it gives more opportunities to citizens for people to live in a democracy than to live in an authoritarian state, the average person.
I saw yesterday one of the Russian World and Peace promoter Dugin. He said like you have to started to cancel the internet in Russia, and
Like they did in China. Yeah, of course they
yeah,
do. They don't want people to have
yeah, and
access to alternative
the
information.
the authoritarian regimes, they don't want people to have access of different information from different
Of course not. They
countries.
want to control the narratives. They want to control
Yeah,
the flow of
yeah.
information. Oh yeah, of
And
course. That's how
one
they stay in power.
one of the one politicians, even in my country, Moldova, came to with projects of for transparency of journalism or something, but it's kind of instrument to control it. It's very tricky with this kind of laws and projects, and they. Well, I am a politician. I am. You have to know about my money, but why don't I have to know about your money? And it's like, okay, but you have this. You make decision about the money, about the budget, about the. I don't make it.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, we have to be strong and we have to know, it was easier before 20, as I said, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. We have to be strong.
yes.
Um,
And democracy is definitely the better than other
well,
regimes. So we have to keep it.
I know what the quote, I think it was democracy is not perfect, but we never had to build a wall to keep people in.
Yeah, that's for
I
sure.
think it's that I'll look it up, but I don't think it was Churchill. Democracy is flawed, but we never had to build a wall to keep our people in.
Yeah. Thank you for this conversation, Alison, and it was a great honor
Well,
to
thank you
you
for
to have.
inviting me and provoking me and making me think about things I don't necessarily think about all the time. But these are important questions, Anna. It's very good that you are asking people
It's
about them.
also for my European colleagues, journalists, young ones. So I think they will be happy to see you here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all my best regards and good luck. You're doing a great job, all of you, and good luck with your careers, your profession as a journalist. It's a fascinating profession, and I wish everybody all the best.
Thank you.
Subscribe to my channel.